This will be a brief review of Myths and Mistakes in New Testament Textual Criticism, edited by Elijah Hixson and Peter Gurry. It's the spine of the book, and we'll briefly let you look at the back of it. I think the key content indicator is here. It is an up-to-date, accurate set of information on the history and current state of New Testament texts that serve as apologists and Christian students, and a self-corrective to evangelical excesses. Here is the ISBN of the book. Brief bios on the two editors. The book is 6 inches wide, 9 inches tall, and it is 1 inch thick. It is a glued paperback, and so it has some endorsements from various people. It's a set of endorsements, a title page. Here is the copyright page. The ISBNs are given again for the print and the digital versions. And then you see along the line, two lines at the bottom of the page. This is the first edition from 2019. They have some ambitions that they might have 22 editions out to 2039, dedicated to their teachers. Then the contents page. So, multiple sections with various classes of myths indicated. You'll see more myths here. And we'll take a look at just a few of these. Certainly don't want to violate the copyright protection of the book. You have lists of figures and tables. A foreword by Dan Wallace. And after the foreword, which takes you through page Romanet 20, there are acknowledgments, abbreviations, and you can tell that the book is somewhat academic by the extent of the abbreviations used on multiple pages here. Then an introduction by Gurry and Hixson. Both of these people are intelligent, articulate, and fairly accessible. I believe both of them are members of New Testament Textual Criticism groups that I've also joined on Facebook. I see posts from both of them from time to time. And Gurry actually replied to a comment I made on one of his posts in a Facebook group at one time. Gurry also is accessible in the sense that he's willing to engage in conversations with people who disagree with him. There was a recent video debate that featured him and James Snap and Jeffrey Riddle on New Testament Textual Criticism. You can find that on YouTube, I think, fairly easily. I've forgotten the host's name, but if you put in some of those names, I think you could find it. And the key takeaways from the introduction. Often you'll find outdated information in apologetic handbooks. Statistical arguments for the reliability of the New Testament are often unqualified or factually incorrect. Christians need to avoid the tendency to believe what we want to be true, and we should be careful not to appeal to exaggerated or sensationalistic claims. I very much agree with that last point in particular. I remember when I was a teenage agnostic, I had a 10th grade English teacher tell me that science had proven that the sun had stayed still in the sky for some period of time in ancient times, and that certainly helped reinforce my agnosticism for a period thereafter. To give you a sense for the kind of information you'll find in here, this is a chart in Jacob W. Peterson's section called Math Myths. The darker bar is for lectionaries, and the lighter colored portion of each bar is for continuous text. And you see you have 7 2nd century manuscripts that are continuous text manuscripts. And the number of lectionaries rises steadily. So you have in the 10th century 159, lectionaries in 174 continuous texts. A couple of pages on, you see this chart, which shows you by century the number of manuscripts by their content. So in the 2nd century, you have the 7 manuscripts, 6 of which are the Gospels and 1 of the Book of Revelation. So that's how you read it. It's a very interesting detail. These are the key takeaways from Math Myths, and I think the thing that is worthy most of emphasis here is that one really shouldn't try to give an exact number. He explains why very well in the article. But you shouldn't try to give an exact number, but to say that there are roughly 5,300 Greek New Testament manuscripts. In Gregory Lanier's section on dating myths, this is the 2nd dating myth section, we see this statement: the Byzantine text is not monolithic and thus cannot be so easily thrown out en masse. In other words, although Snowden showed long ago that there's diversity in the Byzantine text, there's a latent impression among scholars of all stripes that what we call the Byzantine text is essentially uniform or monolithic. So he's saying that that's not true. And here is another interesting statement on the opposite page, which I found worth commenting on. The entire textual stream, including the Byzantine tradition, is far more stable than typically admitted. Then on the very next page you see this statement: the undivided Byzantine text fully agrees with the new ECM text of Acts and the Catholics 94% of the time, so it agrees with the form of the text with which it should, as the theory goes, be diametrically opposed. So he says the core tradition remains remarkably stable over time. And then just a bit below that we see distinctly Byzantine readings often have ancient roots. Still in the same section you see this table of manuscripts. These are minuscules, and he categorizes them by the agreement with which they have with the Nestle-Aland edition, so that's the full dark circle, or with the Byzantine text, or somewhere in between with the half moon there. And these are the key takeaways from that same section. It's often thought that a later manuscript is typically worse than an earlier one, but this is not always true. They can have better readings. The core tradition of the New Testament remains remarkably stable over time, and later scribes show evidence of conscientious work. There is a section here by Zachary Cole. It's entitled Myths About Copyists, and these are the key takeaways from that section. The earliest copyists were not careless amateurs, as some people think, but they were not professionals either. As a group, they show the same level of care, experience, and accuracy that you could reasonably expect of any ancient text. They were not overly careless, and he points out, similar to what we saw earlier, that the macrostructure of the New Testament is remarkably stable. These are the key takeaways in Peter Gurry's essay about textual variants. And he says here that most variants do not affect the meaning of the text or the Christian faith in general, but a few dozen do, and some of these are theologically important. So it isn't as if variants have no theological import, they do. But he goes on to add that we can and should recognize that no doctrine is in jeopardy because of a serious variant. In the essay Myths About Patristics by Andrew Blasky, he does an interesting job discovering and sorting out where this notion that the quotations from the Church Fathers can be used to reconstruct all but 11 verses of the New Testament. And he essentially says that it is patently false. In John Mead's essay about Myths About Canon, he points out that the Christian canon lists provide the best way to interpret the varied contents of the early Christian codices. Just because a book was in the codex does not mean it was therefore deemed canonical. I've seen apologetic arguments, or at least heard them from certain parties, that argue that because books were included in the Septuagint, that is, in the codices of the Septuagint, therefore they must be considered canonical. But that really does prove too much, because those same codices include books that those people wouldn't have considered canonical, like First Esdras or First Clement. I like charts and tables that contain interesting summaries of information, and this is very well done. It shows all these patristic sources of canon lists. So those are in the titles there, and then they give the lists for each of these parties. And it's in 2 parts. I've tried to give you some of the highlights from this book. There's a lot more content here, and it's very interesting. The entire world of New Testament textual criticism is of interest to me. I wish it were more like hard science. I wish there were a way to do experiments to determine which person's subjective opinion about the correct reading were correct. And perhaps it would be possible to at least do some modern day red team, blue team type exercises where you have a red team copying manuscripts and a blue team attempting to reconstruct the original from some select portion of the copied manuscripts. That would be interesting. Perhaps that's already been done. I don't know. At any rate, I do find it very interesting, and I don't know of a better way to do what they're attempting to do today. And I think this book shows some interesting connections to the world of apologetics and errors that are often made in the apologetic approach that should be avoided. So thanks very much for watching. Remember to like the video if you did like it, and subscriptions are always welcome. Thank you.